Hello YouTube and ladies and gentlemen of my subscriber base. So now this video. A lot of the time you hear about, scientific studies about video games showing that they cause violence. Jack Thompson likes to bring this up. Glenn Beck has in the past. A few other people probably have. I know I've done a lot of Fox News commentaries. I don't remember specific names, but I know some other people definitely brought up that there were quote-unquote scientific studies that linked violence in video games. So this guy that we're going to talk about, Bruce Bartholow, he is a psychologist. He's actually, I believe, the head of research at College of Missouri, or University of Missouri. So he's a pretty big wig. He is probably one of the biggest scientific authorities on whether there's a link between desensitization, violence, and video games. So this is a commentary on what he has to say. Let's jump in.
Joining us now on the line from Columbia, Missouri, Bruce Bartholow. He is Associate Professor in the Department of Psychological Sciences at the University of Missouri.
Thanks, I'm doing well, Steve. And you?
Good to hear. Very good, thank you as well. But I want to know if I start playing a lot of video games, whether my mood will change. So let's look into this.
When he asks, even rhetorically, like, will my mood change if I play video games? It creates kind of a false controversy. Because, really, what we should assume is that video games will not change your mood. The null hypothesis, as it were, should be that video games will not change your mood. So it shouldn't be that we're trying to prove that video games don't change your mood. It shouldn't be that we go in there thinking that this is a controversy. We should go in assuming that video games do not change mood, and it should be up to science to prove otherwise. That's the way that just the scientific method works. You have to assume at first that there is no effect. It's up to you to prove that there is one.
Do violent video games desensitize the user to violence, in your view?
In my view, yes, and that's not just my opinion, but that's based on the scientific research that we've done in my lab and also others have done in other labs in the U.S. and other places.
So this guy doesn't really put forth an argument much more convincing than what Jack Thompson would do. Because, just like Jack Thompson, he's talking about studies that have been done, but he's not at all specific about what the studies were. He says he's done some of them in his lab, but other than that, he's not specific about where the studies have been done. And overall, he just doesn't put forth a very convincing argument so far because he doesn't say anything about the studies. So what do you want to bet? What do you want to bet that even when pressed, he still won't get specific about the studies? Let's find out.
What's the most compelling piece of evidence you could share with us?
Well, the whole concept of desensitization really is the idea that an initially negative response to something becomes less negative over time with repeated exposure. And so when we talk about desensitization to violence, what we're talking about is a reduction in the body and in the mind in the kind of negative responses that people initially have when they see blood and gore and violence.
While it probably is helpful to define desensitization, he completely dodged the question. Now, if you remember, what the question was what is the most convincing piece of evidence you can tell us? That's paraphrased. But what is the best piece of evidence you have? Very straightforward question. And he completely dodged it. Now, this may be unintentional, as he's not really used to doing interviews, I'm sure. But it makes you wonder a little bit.
And there are a number of studies now showing that if you randomly assign research subjects to play a violent video game compared to another group who play a nonviolent game, and then you measure some kind of physiological response that they have to viewing real scenes of violence.
So this continues the same problem as before, because he's not really being specific with what study he's talking about. But in addition, he's not being very specific about how the studies were conducted. And that is one criticism I have of pretty much all of these studies that say video games have a link to violence. Almost none of them really have a good way of measuring whether video games lead to more violent thoughts or behavior. With thoughts, some of them find a connection, but I question how they find that connection. Like, a lot of them will have people, like, circle words that they find that have something to do with violence. Or write down every word you can think of that has to do with violence. And after playing video games, people can write down more words. Well, that doesn't mean that it translates into real-life violence. I don't know if that's what they did in his study. But that's an example. So, without being specific about the methodology of the research, it's really not very convincing to me.
What you find is that the folks who have just played the violent game will show a decrease in their physiological response to violence, and also a more kind of lax attitude towards violence, and they're also, in some studies, less likely to help an injured person, things along those lines. All of those things are associated with the idea that they're being desensitized to violence.
Alright, all of my previous criticisms still apply. He's being very general. He's not given a single specific study, even in his own lab, But let's start taking him at face value. Let's assume that everything he's saying is correct. Okay, that this is really what the studies show. And that the studies are reliable, which I don't think is a safe assumption. Because the studies are very inconsistent. For just about every study you have that shows a link between video games and violence, another one will come out showing no link. Gaming websites put them up all the time, of course, because they have a bias. But there are a lot of ones that show no link. But again, let's take them at face value. So you're less likely to help a bystander after playing a violent video game. This has got to be a simulated thing. So I'm not convinced, because they're simulating a situation. And I just don't think you can simulate a situation like that.
Well, that is watching, though, and not doing. So is this anything we really need to be concerned about?
Well, in fact, it is. And part of the reason is that, we've known, really going back at least 40 or 50 years that even passive viewing of violence in the media is associated with increases in aggressive behavior.
So I'm actually really glad that he brought this up. Psychology in the past has actually concluded that watching TV, violent TV, can make people more violent. But this makes me wonder why we're even having a conversation about this. And this is why I'm ending the video here. Because really, unless you think that we should really censor TV or ban TV, violent TV, banning or censoring violent video games doesn't make sense. Because according to psychology, they have an equal effect on people. Now, I find it dubious, these results about TV and video games. But if we take them at face value, you would have to censor both to be consistent, or you'd have to ban both to be consistent, and I don't see anyone who wants to ban violent TV. So, as always, I am Pirate of the 2Ube. Please rate this video, please share the video, that always helps me a ton. Like the video, and comment with your own thoughts, if there's anything I missed, or if you'd like to see me do the rest of this interview. Because I've only done about a fifth or sixth of the interview, there's a lot more to do. Finally, I need an intro or an outro. I do not have many skills in the area of creating intros and outros, so if any of you would like to make an intro, I could link to your YouTube channel, I could give you credit, whatever, but if any of you would like to make me one, that would be awesome.